Welcome to the multiverse of anime. If you're ready to witness a timeline where breathing techniques collide with godlike power, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this story is about to blow your mind. Picture this: the night sky explodes in silver light as two figures clash at impossible speeds. Tanjiro Kamado, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly glow, moves like liquid mercury around Muzan's desperate attacks. But this isn't the Tanjiro you know. This is something beyond human, beyond demon, beyond anything the world has ever seen. His body dodges without conscious thought. His blade cuts through dimensions themselves, and Muzan, the demon king who has terrorized humanity for 1,000 years, is actually retreating, actually afraid. The Infinity Castle crumbles around them like paper. Upper Moon demons flee in terror. Even Nezuko stares in shock as her brother transcends every law of physics and combat. His movements are pure instinct, his power absolute, his compassion unchanged. But here's what's really wild. This isn't just about one boy getting stronger. Every person around Tanjiro starts fighting better, thinking clearer, becoming more than they ever thought possible. His power doesn't just change him, it transforms everyone. Zenitsu overcomes his crippling fear and masters thunder breathing while conscious. Inosuke develops an entirely new fighting style that combines human technique with beast instincts. Even the Hashira, the strongest demon slayers alive, discover abilities they never knew they had. But when Muzan creates the ultimate counter to Ultra Instinct, when he births a demon specifically designed to devour hope itself, even transcendent power might not be enough. Can compassion triumph over 1,000 years of hatred? Will Tanjiro's belief in redemption survive when facing absolute evil? And what happens when the cosmic forces watching from beyond decide that this reality has become too dangerous to exist? The answers will shock you. Stay tuned because this story is about to redefine everything you thought you knew about power, redemption, and what it truly means to be human. Let me take you back to where it all began. Before the silver eyes, before the impossible power, before Tanjiro became something that could make demons tremble with fear. Back when he was just a 15-year-old boy trying to keep his family fed by selling charcoal in the mountains. The Kamado family lived a simple life high up on Mount Natagumo. Tanjiro was the oldest son, carrying the weight of responsibility on his shoulders after his father passed away. Every morning he'd wake up before dawn, load his cart with charcoal, and make the long journey down to the village below. His younger siblings would gather around him when he returned, their faces lighting up with joy at the small treats he'd bring back. Nezuko, his younger sister, was his closest companion. She had this incredible ability to see right through people, to understand their hearts in ways that amazed even Tanjiro. She'd help him prepare the charcoal, always humming these little songs that made the work feel lighter. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged through years of shared responsibility and genuine love. But December 28th was different. A massive blizzard had rolled in from the north, turning the mountain paths into death traps. The village elder, concerned for the young man's safety, insisted Tanjiro stay the night rather than risk the treacherous journey home. "Your family will understand," the old man said, offering him a warm place by the fire. "No charcoal is worth your life." Tanjiro accepted reluctantly. Something felt wrong, like an itch he couldn't scratch. His enhanced sense of smell, inherited from his father, kept picking up scents that didn't belong. Fear, blood, something wild and predatory moving through the forest. He told himself it was just his imagination, just worry about leaving his family alone for the night. He should have trusted his instincts. The next morning, Tanjiro raced up the mountain path as fast as his legs could carry him. The snow had stopped, but the silence was deafening. No birds singing, no sounds of life anywhere. Just his own breathing and the crunch of snow beneath his feet. That wrongness he'd felt the night before had grown into full-blown panic. When he crested the hill and saw his home, his world shattered completely. Blood painted the snow in crimson streaks. The door hung off its hinges. And there, scattered around the yard like broken dolls, were the bodies of his family. His mother, his little brothers and sisters, all of them torn apart by something with claws and inhuman strength. Tanjiro's legs gave out. He fell to his knees in the blood-soaked snow, unable to process what he was seeing. These weren't just deaths. This was a massacre. Something had enjoyed killing them, had taken its time with their suffering. Then he heard it, a weak whimper from inside the house. "Nezuko!" He scrambled to his feet and rushed inside, hope and terror warring in his chest. He found her barely conscious, her body broken and blood pooling beneath her. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. "I'm here," he whispered, gathering her into his arms. "I'm here. I'm going to get you help. You're going to be okay." But as he lifted her, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Her wounds weren't healing like they should. Instead, they were changing. Her fingernails were growing longer. Her teeth were becoming sharper. And her eyes, when they fluttered open, had turned a brilliant amber color. The demon who had killed his family had infected her. She was transforming. Tanjiro didn't hesitate. He wrapped Nezuko in his haori and began running down the mountain, carrying her on his back. If he could get her to the village, maybe someone could help. Maybe there was still time to save her. But the transformation was happening faster than he'd expected. Halfway down the mountain, Nezuko's body convulsed. She let out a growl that definitely wasn't human, and then she sank her newly formed fangs into his shoulder. The pain was incredible, but Tanjiro didn't let go. Even as his sister, driven by demonic hunger, tried to tear into him, he held on tight. "Nezuko, I know you're in there," he pleaded. "You're stronger than this. You're my sister. Please, fight it." That's when the avalanche started. The sound of Tanjiro's voice, raised in desperation, triggered a cascade of snow and ice from the peaks above. Suddenly they were both tumbling down the mountainside, a roaring wall of white death chasing them. Tanjiro twisted his body to shield Nezuko from the worst of it, even as she continued to attack him with mindless ferocity. They crashed into a grove of trees, the impact separating them. Tanjiro rolled through the snow, his body screaming in agony from a dozen different injuries. When he finally came to a stop, he looked around frantically for his sister. Nezuko was crouched 20 feet away, her amber eyes fixed on him with predatory hunger. She'd grown taller, more muscular, her hair had become wild and untamed, and when she opened her mouth he could see the razor-sharp fangs that marked her as something no longer human. She was beautiful and terrifying and completely lost to the demon inside her. "Nezuko," Tanjiro whispered, slowly getting to his feet. "I know this isn't you. I know you're still in there somewhere. You protected Rokuta when he had nightmares. You sang lullabies to Hanako when she couldn't sleep. You're the kindest person I've ever known." The demon wearing his sister's face tilted her head, confusion flickering across her features. For just a moment, the hunger in her eyes was replaced by something else. Recognition, love, the real Nezuko fighting to break through. But then the scent of his blood reached her, and the monster took control again. She lunged forward with inhuman speed, claws extended to tear out his throat. Tanjiro had no training, no weapon, no plan. All he had was love for his sister and the desperate need to save her. He dodged her attack purely on instinct, his body moving without conscious thought. It was like time slowed down, allowing him to see exactly where she would strike and exactly how to avoid it. That's when he heard the voice behind him. "Step away from the demon, boy." Tanjiro spun around to find a man in a blue and white Hyori standing in the snow, a sword at his side. The man's face was emotionless, his dark eyes cold as winter itself. This was Gyu Tamioka, though Tanjiro didn't know it yet. This was a Hashira, one of the most powerful demon slayers in existence. And he was here to kill Nezuko. "Please," Tanjiro said, positioning himself between the swordsman and his sister. "She's not like other demons. She's my sister. She's still human inside." Gyu's expression didn't change. All demons were human once. That doesn't make them any less dangerous. But she hasn't eaten anyone. Look at her. She's fighting the hunger. She's still herself. She attacked you. She's confused and scared. If you give me time, I can reach her. I can help her remember who she is. Gyu drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the pale sunlight. My job is to protect humans from demons. Nothing more, nothing less. Tanjiro felt something building inside him, a pressure that seemed to come from the very core of his being. His family was dead, his sister was transformed, and now this stranger wanted to take away the only person he had left in the world. The emotions swirling inside him were unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Grief and rage and love and desperation all mixing together into something that felt almost too big for his human heart to contain. His vision began to blur, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw silver light flickering at the edges of his sight. "I won't let you hurt her," he said, his voice carrying a power that made both Gyu and Nezuko freeze. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my sister, even if it means becoming something I was never meant to be." That's when the real story began. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as Tanjiro stood between Gyu's blade and his transformed sister. Something was happening inside him, something that had never occurred in the original timeline. The grief of losing his family, the terror of Nezuko's transformation, and his absolute refusal to lose her too were creating a perfect storm of emotion that was about to change everything. Tanjiro's mind raced through memories of his father. The way Tanjiro would dance the Hinokami Kagura on New Year's Eve, his movements so fluid they seemed to flow like water, yet strike with the power of flame. The dance connects us to something greater, his father had once told him, something that exists beyond the physical world. At the time, Tanjiro thought he was just talking about tradition, about honoring their ancestors. Now facing the impossible choice between his sister's life and a Hashira's duty, he began to understand what his father really meant. "You don't understand," Tanjiro said to Gyu, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "She's all I have left. My entire family is gone. I can't watch her die too." Gyu's expression remained stone cold. "Your feelings don't change what she is. That thing wearing your sister's face will kill innocent people if I let it live." "She won't." Tanjiro stepped closer, completely unafraid of the blade pointed at his chest. "Look at her eyes. Really, look at them. Yes, she's become a demon, but she's fighting it. She's choosing not to hurt people." Behind him, Nezuko had gone completely still. Her amber eyes were fixed on her brother's back, and something incredible was happening. The mindless hunger that had driven her moments before was being pushed aside by something stronger. Recognition, love, the unbreakable bond between siblings. But Jiu wasn't convinced. He'd seen too many humans beg for the lives of their transformed loved ones, only to watch those same demons tear apart entire villages. His duty was clear, even if it meant breaking this boy's heart. "Move aside," Jiu commanded, raising his sword. "I won't ask again." That's when Tanjiro felt it, a warmth spreading through his chest, different from anything he'd ever experienced. It started small, like a candle flame, but grew rapidly into something that felt like liquid fire in his veins. His vision sharpened beyond human limits. He could see every snowflake falling around them, could track the subtle shift in Gyu's stance that preceded an attack. But more than that, he could sense something else, a presence, ancient and powerful, that had been sleeping in his bloodline for generations. The same force that had allowed his ancestors to dance between raindrops, to move like they were part of the wind itself. "My father told me stories," Tanjiro said, his voice growing calmer even as the power inside him built to dangerous levels, about the original demon slayers, the ones who came before breathing techniques were ever invented. They didn't fight with their minds or their training. They fought with something deeper, something that came from the soul itself. Jiu noticed the change immediately. The boy's movements had become different, more fluid. Even standing still, he seemed to be in motion, like he was existing slightly ahead of the present moment. "What are you?" Jiu whispered. Tanjiro's eyes began to glow with silver light. "I'm someone who refuses to give up on the people I love." The transformation wasn't gradual. One moment Tanjiro was a desperate boy pleading for his sister's life. The next he had become something that existed beyond normal human limitations. His body moved without conscious thought, guided by instincts that had been honed across countless generations of his bloodline. Jiu struck with the speed of a master swordsman, his blade cutting through the air fast enough to slice falling snowflakes in half. But Tanjiro wasn't there anymore. He had moved before Jiu's muscles had even finished contracting, flowing around the attack like water around a stone. "Impossible," Jiu breathed, spinning to track the boy's movement. But Tanjiro was already behind him, moving in a way that defied every law of combat Jiu had ever learned. This wasn't technique. This wasn't training. This was pure instinct elevated to an art form. "I don't want to fight you," Tanjiro said, his voice carrying an otherworldly calm, "but I won't let you hurt my sister." Jiu launched into a series of attacks, each one faster and more precise than the last. Water-breathing first form, water surface slash. Second form, water wheel. Third form, flowing dance. Every technique in his arsenal executed with the skill of a Hashira. Tanjiro dodged them all without even trying. His body moved like it knew where each attack would land before Jiu had decided to make it. He flowed between sword strikes, his feet barely touching the snow, his silver eyes tracking movements that hadn't happened yet. Nezuko watched in fascination as her brother danced around the Hashira's attacks. Something about his movements called to her, reminded her of who she used to be. The demon hunger that had consumed her thoughts was being pushed aside by wonder and recognition. "How are you doing this?" Jiu demanded, his usual composure cracking. "You have no terrain, no technique. This is impossible." "Maybe," Tanjiro replied, still moving in that impossible fluid way. "But impossible things happen when you have something worth protecting." The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for several more minutes. Jiu threw everything he had at the boy, attacks that should have been unavoidable, combinations that had never failed him before, but Tanjiro moved through them all like they were standing still. More importantly, he never once attacked back. Every movement was defensive. Every dodge was followed by a step away rather than a counterstrike. Even with power that clearly exceeded the Hashira's, Tanjiro remained true to his compassionate nature. That's what finally convinced Jiu to lower his sword. "What do you want?" the Hashira asked, breathing heavily from his exertion. "I want you to give us a chance," Tanjiro said, the silver glow in his eyes softening but not disappearing. "Don't kill Nezuko. Let me prove that she's different. Let me show you that demons don't have to be monsters." Jiu stared at the boy for a long moment, his mind racing. Everything he'd been taught told him to end this here and now. The demon needed to die, and this boy's strange power was too dangerous to be left unchecked. But something about Tanjiro's absolute refusal to use his incredible abilities for violence gave him pause. In all his years as a demon slayer, he'd never seen anything like this. Power without corruption, strength without cruelty, transcendence without losing one's humanity. "If I spare her," Jiu said slowly, "and she kills someone, their blood will be on your hands." "I understand," Tanjiro replied immediately. "I'll take full responsibility for her actions, and if she ever loses control completely, if she ever becomes the monster you think she is, then you can do what you have to do." Behind them, Nezuko let out a soft whimper. Both males turned to look at her, and what they saw changed everything. She was crying. Tears were streaming down her face as she looked at her brother, And in her amber eyes was not hunger or malice, but gratitude and love. She was understanding every word of their conversation, was aware that Tanjiro was risking everything to save her. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and pulled the bamboo muzzle from her mouth. Jiyu tensed, ready to strike if she showed any sign of attacking. Instead, she spoke. Her voice was rough from the transformation, but the words were clear and unmistakably human. "Thank you," she whispered, looking directly at her brother. "Thank you for not giving up on me." The shock on Juyu's face was absolute. In all his years of fighting demons, he had never seen one display genuine human emotion, never seen one choose to restrain itself when given the opportunity to feed. But the real shock came when Nezuko turned to face him directly. "I'm sorry," she said, bowing her head respectfully. "I'm sorry for frightening you. I know what I've become, and I know why you want to kill me, but I swear on my family's memory that I will never hurt an innocent person. My brother's faith in me won't be wasted." Jiyu lowered his sword completely, his worldview fundamentally shaken. This went against everything he thought he knew about demons, about the nature of good and evil, about the war they'd been fighting for so long. "There's someone you need to meet," he said finally. "Both of you. My master will want to hear about this." As they prepared to leave the blood-stained clearing, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows, a pale man in a business suit, his red eyes gleaming with interest as he observed the boy with silver eyes and the demon who had chosen to remain human. Muzan Kibutsuji had found his next great obsession. And somewhere deep in Tanjiro's subconscious, an ancient power stirred fully awake for the first time in 1,000 years, sensing that its greatest test was yet to come. The war between demons and humans had just taken a turn that neither side was prepared for. The journey to Urakodaki's home should have taken 3 days. Instead, it took 6, and any single one of those days brought new revelations about just how dramatically the world had changed. Tanjiro's ultra instinct didn't disappear after the confrontation with Giyu. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger, more refined with each passing hour. He found himself moving differently, thinking differently, perceiving things that should have been impossible for a human to detect. On the second day, as they made camp in a small cave, Nezuko approached her brother with wonder in her amber eyes. "Something's different about you," she said, her voice still rough but becoming more human with each conversation. "When you move, it's like you're dancing to music only you can hear." Tanjiro looked down at his hands, watching the way they seemed to shimmer slightly in the firelight. "I don't understand it either. It started when I thought I was going to lose you. Like something inside me just refused to accept that reality." Jiyu had been watching this exchange with growing fascination. As a Hashira, he'd been trained to recognize different breathing techniques, to identify the subtle signs that marked a demon slayer's fighting style. But what Tanjiro was displaying defied all classification. "Show me," Jiyu said suddenly. "Show you what? How you move? What you did back there wasn't any breathing technique I've ever seen. It was something else entirely." Tanjiro stood up slowly, closing his eyes and focusing on the feeling he'd experienced during their fight. The silver glow returned to his eyes almost immediately, and his body began to move with that same impossible fluidity. But this time, Nezuko gasped in recognition. "I've seen this before," she whispered. "Father used to move like this when he performed the Hinokami Kagura. Not exactly the same, but similar, like he was connected to something beyond the physical world." That's when the first attack came. They were set upon by 3 demons just after midnight, drawn by the scent of Nezuko's transformation and the strange energy signature Tanjiro was unconsciously emitting. These weren't powerful demons, just hungry ones looking for easy prey. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first demon lunged at Jiyu, confident that a single human would be easy to overwhelm. Instead, it found itself facing a master swordsman who had just spent days analyzing Tanjiro's impossible movement style. Jiyu's water breathing had evolved, incorporating elements of instinctive flow that made his attacks unpredictable even to himself. The second demon went after Nezuko, assuming that a newly transformed demon would be weak and disoriented. It discovered instead that Nezuko had retained not only her human intelligence, but had also developed strength and speed that far exceeded typical demon capabilities. More importantly, she was protecting rather than hunting, fighting with a precision and control that should have been impossible for someone so recently transformed. But it was the third demon's fate that truly showed how much everything had changed. It attacked Tanjiro with confidence, seeing only an unarmed boy with strange eyes. What it encountered was something that existed beyond the normal rules of combat. Tanjiro didn't fight the demon so much as he simply existed around its attacks. Every claw swipe passed through empty air. Every lunge met with nothing but space, and when Tanjiro finally moved to counterattack, borrowing Giyu's sword with permission, his strike was so precise, so perfectly timed, that the demon's head separated from its body before it even realized it was in danger. "How?" the demon gasped as it began to disintegrate. "What are you? Someone who refuses to let evil win?" Tanjiro replied simply. But the real shock came after the battle was over. Jiyu examined his sword and found that Tanjiro's single strike had been so clean, so perfect, that the blade hadn't even been dulled by contact with the demon's neck. That's impossible, Jiuyu muttered. Demon bone is harder than steel. There should be damage to the blade. Tanjiro shrugged, looking as confused as anyone. I just cut where it felt right to cut, like the sword was showing me the exact spot where the demon was weakest. Over the following days, more incidents occurred that cemented the reality of Tanjiro's transformation. A group of bandits attempted to rob them and found themselves unconscious without anyone seeing Tanjiro move. A rock slide that should have crushed all three travelers was somehow diverted around them, as if the falling stones simply chose to land elsewhere. Most remarkably, other demon slayers they encountered on the road began fighting better after spending time around Tanjiro. It was subtle at first, just slightly improved reaction times, and better instinctive responses to danger, but the effect was undeniable. It's like your presence is contagious, one young slayer told him after successfully defeating a demon that had been giving him trouble for weeks. When you're around, everything just feels more possible. Word of the silver-eyed boy and his demon sister began to spread through both human and demon communities. The Hashira were calling emergency meetings, lower-ranking demons were fleeing territories they'd held for decades, and somewhere in the shadows, Muzan was mobilizing his most powerful servants to investigate this new threat. But perhaps the most significant change was in Nezuko herself. Her transformation wasn't progressing like a normal demon's would. Instead of becoming more monstrous, she was somehow becoming more human. Her speech improved daily. Her control over her new abilities was remarkable. And most impossibly, she was showing signs of being able to survive in sunlight, something that should have been completely impossible for any demon. I think, she told her brother on the 6th night of their journey, that your power is affecting me too, like it's helping me hold on to who I used to be. Tanjiro looked at his sister's face in the firelight, seeing hope and humanity shining in her amber eyes. Maybe that's what this power is really for. Not just to fight stronger, but to help people stay true to themselves no matter what tries to change them. What none of them realized was that their conversation was being overheard by a figure crouched in the darkness beyond their camp. Upper Moon 6 had been sent to observe and report back to Muzan, but what Daki was seeing challenged everything she thought she knew about the relationship between demons and humans. A demon choosing to protect rather than consume. A human with power that seemed to strengthen everyone around him. And most disturbing of all, a bond between siblings that appeared to transcend the fundamental nature of what they had become. As Daki retreated to make her report, she carried with her the uncomfortable realization that the war between demons and humans might be entering a phase that neither side was prepared for. The boy with silver eyes was changing all the rules, and not even the Demon King himself knew what that might mean for the future. 2 weeks after the confrontation on Mount Natagamo, the effects of Tanjiro's awakening were rippling through both the human and demon worlds in ways no one could have anticipated. Sakonji Urukadaki had trained demon slayers for decades, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for Tanjiro Kamado. The boy's progress wasn't just rapid, it was supernatural. Techniques that should have taken months to master were being absorbed in hours. More disturbing still, Tanjiro was unconsciously improving upon forms that had been perfected over generations. Watch this, Urukadaki told Jigyu during one of the Hashira's visits to check on their progress. Tanjiro, show him the water-breathing forms I taught you yesterday. Tanjiro nodded and began the demonstration, but what emerged wasn't quite water-breathing as Urukadaki had taught it. The movements flowed like water, yes, but there was something else there too. An instinctive element that made each form more efficient, more deadly, more perfect. He's not copying the techniques, Gyu observed with growing amazement. He's understanding them. Seeing what they're trying to accomplish and finding better ways to accomplish it. Exactly, Urukadaki replied. And that's not even the strangest part. Show him what happens when you practice, Tanjiro. Tanjiro began running through a series of training exercises, his movements fluid and precise, but as he practiced, something remarkable happened to the other students training nearby. Their own techniques began to improve, as if Tanjiro's presence was somehow elevating their natural abilities. It's like he's teaching without speaking, one of the junior slayers whispered to another. When he trains nearby, everything just makes more sense. But the ripple effects weren't limited to the training grounds. 3 days into their stay, they received an unexpected visit. Inosuke Hashibira came crashing through the forest like a human tornado, his boar mask askew and his twin blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. I heard there was someone strong here, Inosuke bellowed, pointing dramatically at Tanjiro. Fight me! I'm going to prove I'm the strongest demon slayer in Japan. What followed was less a fight and more a revelation. Inosuke attacked with his usual wild abandon, his beast-like instincts making him a formidable opponent despite his lack of formal training. But Tanjiro didn't fight back in any conventional sense. Instead, he moved around Inosuke's attacks with that same impossible fluidity he'd shown against Jigyu, never striking back, never showing aggression, and gradually something incredible began to happen. Inosuke's movements started to change. His wild swings became more controlled. His footwork improved. His breathing, usually chaotic and unstructured, began to fall into a rhythm that enhanced rather than hindered his natural abilities.
What are you doing to me?
Inosuke demanded, lowering his swords in confusion. My body feels different, stronger. I'm not doing anything, Tanjiro replied honestly. You're just finding your own natural rhythm. You've always had incredible instincts, Inosuke. You just needed to trust them instead of fighting against them. By the end of their sparring session, Inosuke had unconsciously developed his own unique breathing style, something that combined his beast-like instincts with the disciplined power of formal demon-slaying techniques. He would later call it beast breathing, never realizing that he'd created it under the influence of Tanjiro's transcendent abilities. But perhaps the most significant change came when Zenitsu Agatsuma arrived a week later. The blonde-haired boy was a study in contradictions, cowardly while awake but incredibly skilled while unconscious, possessed of only one thunder-breathing technique but having perfected that single form to an incredible degree. When he first encountered Tanjiro, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. You smell different, Zenitsu said, his enhanced hearing allowing him to detect something others missed, like lightning and thunder and something else, something that makes my whole body want to move faster. During their first training session together, something unprecedented happened. Zenitsu's unconscious fighting state began to activate while he was still awake. For the first time in his life, he was able to access his incredible speed and skill while fully aware of what he was doing. This is impossible, he whispered, staring at his hands as electricity crackled between his fingers. I can feel the thunder breathing even while unconscious. How is this happening? Maybe, Tanjiro suggested gently, you were always capable of this. Maybe you just needed to believe in yourself the way others believe in you. Meanwhile, reports were flooding in from across Japan about unusual demon behavior. Entire territories that had been controlled by demons for decades were suddenly being abandoned. Lower-ranked demons were fleeing rather than fighting demon slayers. And most disturbing of all, some demons were simply disappearing without explanation. What the Demon Slayer Corps didn't know was that Muzan had issued new orders to his followers. Any demon that encountered the silver-eyed boy was to retreat immediately and report back. He wanted to understand this new threat before deciding how to eliminate it. But not all demons were following orders. Upper Moon 5, Gyoko, had become obsessed with the idea of incorporating Tanjiro's power into his art. He began stalking the group, staying just close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid detection. What he saw challenged his understanding of power dynamics in ways that made him increasingly unstable. Art should be about transcendence, he muttered to himself while watching Tanjiro train. But this boy has achieved something beyond art. He's become living poetry. The observation period came to an abrupt end when Gyoko's artistic impulses overcame his strategic thinking. He launched an assault on Yorikodaki's dwelling, confident that his superior demon abilities would allow him to capture Tanjiro for study. The battle that followed was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Gyoko's attacks were works of deadly art, each strike designed to be as beautiful as it was lethal. His blood demon art created impossible geometric patterns in the air, deadly fish swimming through solid matter, vases that could transport attacks across vast distances. But Tanjiro moved through it all like he was dancing to music only he could hear. Every attack missed by the narrowest of margins. Every deadly trap was avoided with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. And when Tanjiro finally went on the offensive, his counterattacks found weaknesses in Yoko's defenses that the demon didn't even existed. The most remarkable part wasn't Tanjiro's individual performance, though. It was how everyone else fought during the battle. Inosuke moved with unprecedented coordination, his beast breathing perfectly complementing Tanjiro's fluid style. Zenitsu maintained his conscious thunder breathing throughout the entire fight, his speed increasing beyond anything he'd ever achieved before. Even Nezuko participated, her demon abilities enhanced by some unknown factor that allowed her to match an Upper Moon's power level despite being transformed for only weeks. But it was Gyu's performance that truly showed how much everything had changed. The normally stoic Hashira fought with a passion and precision that elevated his water breathing to entirely new levels. His attacks flowed seamlessly with Tanjiro's movements, creating combination techniques that neither had planned but both executed perfectly. When the battle finally ended with Yoko's defeat, the assembled fighters stood in stunned silence. They had just defeated an Upper Moon demon with coordination and teamwork that should have taken years to develop. "How do we do that?" Zenitsu asked, still crackling with controlled lightning. "I think," Tanjiro said, looking around at his friends with wonder and gratitude, "we just learned that individual strength isn't as important as fighting for something bigger than ourselves." But as they celebrated their victory, none of them noticed the crow perched in a nearby tree, its red eyes gleaming with intelligence far beyond that of any normal bird. Muzan's observation network had witnessed everything, and the Demon King now understood that his previous assessments had been woefully inadequate. The boy with silver eyes wasn't just powerful, he was transformative. He made everyone around him stronger, more coordinate, more capable of transcending their individual limitations. For the first time in 1,000 years, Muzan Kibutsuji felt something he hadn't experienced since his own transformation into a demon. He felt afraid, and in that fear, he made a decision that would escalate the conflict beyond anything the world had ever seen. If conventional demons couldn't handle this threat, then he would have to create something entirely new. Something specifically designed to counter the power of Ultra Instinct itself. The war was about to enter a phase that would test not just Tanjiro's abilities, but his fundamental reveal that even the most monstrous beings could choose to be something better. The news of Upper Moon 5's defeat sent shockwaves through both the Demon Slayer Corps and Muzan's hierarchy. For the first time in centuries, an Upper Moon had been eliminated not by a single powerful Hashira, but by a coordinated group led by an untrained boy. The implications were staggering. Kagaya Ubaishiki called an emergency meeting of all available Hashira. The usually serene leader's face showed lines of concern as he addressed the assembled warriors. "What we're dealing with is unprecedented," he began, his gentle voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Tanjiro Kamado represents either our greatest hope or our most dangerous unknown. I need to meet him personally." But not everyone was convinced that Tanjiro represented hope. Saname Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira, slammed his fist on the table with enough force to crack the wood. "This is insane. We're talking about trusting someone who travels with a demon. For all we know, this whole thing is an elaborate trap set by Muzan himself." The boy defeated an Upper Moon. "Duh," you pointed out calmly. "If this were a trap, it would be unnecessarily complex." "Or incredibly sophisticated," Sanami shot back. "Think about it. A demon that doesn't eat humans, a boy with impossible powers, perfect teamwork that develops in days instead of years. It's too convenient, too perfect." The argument that followed revealed deep fractures within the core itself. Some Hashira, like Kyujiro Rengoku and Mitsuri Kanroji, were fascinated by the possibility that demons and humans might coexist. Others, particularly those who had lost family to demons, viewed any cooperation with transformed beings as betrayal of their fallen loved ones. The tension came to a head when Sanami decided to test Nezuko's supposed humanity personally. He arrived at Urokodaki's home 3 days later, ostensibly to evaluate Tanjiro's progress. But his real target was Nezuko. Without warning, he drew his blade and cut his own arm, letting the scent of his rare blood fill the air. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Nezuko's eyes went wide, her pupils dilating as the sweet scent of Muraki blood triggered every demonic instinct she possessed. Her breathing became ragged, her muscles tensed, and for a moment it looked like she might lose control completely. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of attacking, Nezuko turned away, covering her nose with her hands and backing toward the house. She was fighting the hunger, choosing to distance herself from temptation rather than give in to it. "Interesting," Tsunami said, advancing with his bleeding arm extended. "But let's see how long that resolve lasts." That's when Tanjiro's Ultra Instinct activated with a fury none of them had seen before. The silver glow in his eyes wasn't gentle this time. It was blazing, intense, carrying the weight of absolute protective instinct. He moved between Sanami and Nezuko faster than the Hashira could track, his presence alone seeming to calm his sister's struggling self-control. "Don't," Tanjiro said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in everyone's bones. "She's fighting as hard as she can. Don't make it harder for her." "I'm testing her limits," Sanemi replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The boy's presence was affecting him too, making his own aggressive instincts feel suddenly inappropriate. "No," Tanjiro said, stepping closer. "You're testing mine." What followed wasn't exactly a fight. Sanemi was one of the most skilled combatants in the Corps. His wind-breathing techniques honed through years of brutal training and real combat experience. But Tanjiro had evolved beyond conventional combat. Every attack Sanemi launched was countered not with aggression but with redirection. His wind blades were turned aside, his speed matched effortlessly, his combinations unraveled by movements that seemed to anticipate his intentions before he formed them. But more disturbing for Sanemi was what he felt during the exchange. Tanjiro's presence was affecting his wind breathing, making it smoother, more efficient. He was fighting better than he ever had before, even while being completely outmatched. "What are you doing to me?" Sanemi demanded, stepping back in confusion. "Nothing," Tanjiro replied, the silver glow fading from his eyes. "I'm just helping you be the fighter you already are. Your techniques are incredible, Sanemi. You just need to trust them instead of forcing them." The Wind Hashira stared at the boy for a long moment, his worldview fundamentally shaken. He'd come here prove that demons couldn't be trusted, that power like Tanjiro's was too dangerous to be allowed. Instead, he'd found himself fighting better than ever while being gently schooled by someone with no formal training. Behind them, Nezuko had completely regained control. She approached slowly, her amber eyes filled with understanding rather than hunger. I'm sorry, she said to Cianami, bowing respectfully. I know my reaction frightened you. I know it made you doubt whether I can really control myself. But I want you to know that even when the hunger was strongest, even when every instinct told me to attack, I never stopped thinking of you as someone worth protecting rather than someone to prey upon. Sanami's response was quiet, almost inaudible. My mother became a demon. She killed my younger siblings before I could stop her. I had to... He couldn't finish the sentence. I understand, Nezuko said gently. I understand why you needed to test me. And I want you to know that if I ever become like that, if I ever lose myself completely, I won't blame you for doing what needs to be done. That conversation marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance. Sanami didn't trust easily, but he couldn't deny what he'd witnessed. Nezuko's self-control, Tanjiro's transcendent abilities, and most importantly, the way Tanjiro's presence had improved his own fighting capabilities. Within days, other Hashira began arriving to witness this phenomenon for themselves. Kengan Uzui came expecting to find an unflashy display of borrowed power. Instead, he discovered that Tanjiro's abilities enhanced sound-based techniques in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Their sparring sessions resulted in Tengen developing new forms of sound breathing that incorporated rhythm and harmony on levels he'd never achieved before. This is incredibly flashy, Tengen declared after their first training session. You're not just staunch, you're making everyone around you stronger. That's the most flamboyant power I've ever seen. Kyujiro Rengoku arrived with his characteristic enthusiasm and left with something approaching religious awe. Tanjiro's instinctive movement style complemented flame breathing perfectly, creating combination attacks that burned with the intensity of small suns. Your passion burns as brightly as any flame, Rengoku told him. But more than that, you help others find their own inner fire. That's a gift that transcends any breathing technique. But it was Muichiro Tokito's visit that revealed something truly extraordinary about Tanjiro's abilities. The Mist Hashira arrived in his typical detached state, barely remembering why he'd come or what he was supposed to evaluate. But something about Tanjiro's presence began affecting his memory problems almost immediately. During their first sparring session, Muichiro's movements became sharper, more focused. His mist-breathing techniques, usually scattered and unpredictable, began forming coherent patterns. And most remarkably, he started remembering things, his past, his family, the reasons he'd become a demon slayer in the first place. I remember, he whispered after their training ended, tears streaming down his face. I remember my brother. I remember why I started fighting. How is this possible? Maybe, Tanjiro suggested gently, you never really forgot. Maybe you just needed someone to remind you that it's okay to remember painful things if they help you protect people. These encounters established a new dynamic within the Demon Slayer Corps. The Hashira weren't just accepting Tanjiro and Nezuko. They were actively seeking opportunities to train with them. Word spread through the ranks that spending time around the silver-eyed boy could enhance your natural abilities, help you break through plateaus you'd been struggling with for years. But the most significant change in alliances came from an unexpected source. During a mission to investigate demon activity in a remote mountain village, Tanjiro's group encountered someone who should have been their enemy. Akaza, Upper Moon 3, had been sent to eliminate the silver-eyed threat once and for all. The battle that ensued was fierce and devastating. Akaza's martial arts skills were phenomenal, his regeneration seemingly infinite, his battle lust overwhelming. But something strange happened as the fight progressed. Tanjiro's refusal to show killing intent, his emphasis on protecting rather than destroying, his genuine attempts to understand Akaza's motivations, began to affect the Upper Moon in ways that caught everyone off guard. Why won't you hate me? Akaza demanded during a brief pause in their exchange. I've killed hundreds of your kind. I'm trying to kill you right now. Why do you keep looking at me like I'm worth saving? Because you are, Tanjiro replied simply. I can see it in your movements, in the way you fight. You're not evil, you're in pain. Someone you loved was taken from you, and you've been running from that grief ever since. The words hit Akaza like a physical blow. Memories he'd suppressed for over a century began surfacing. A girl named Koyuki, a dojo where he'd found family, a human life filled with love and loss and meaning. The battle ended not with victory or defeat, but with Akaza fleeing in confusion, his fundamental understanding of himself shaken to its core. But he didn't report back to Muzan. Instead, he disappeared into the wilderness, wrestling with questions that Tanjiro's compassion had awakened in him. The boy with silver eyes was doing more than changing individual hearts and minds. He was rewriting the basic rules of the conflict between demons and humans, proving that redemption was possible even for those who had fallen furthest into darkness. And in his fortress of flesh and shadow, Muzan felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in a millennium. Now, the transformation of Akaza sent ripples of panic through Muzan's inner circle. For the first time in centuries, one of his upper moons had encountered a demon slayer and chosen to flee rather than fight to the death. The implications were terrifying. In the dimensional space of the Infinity Castle, Muzan convened an emergency meeting with his remaining upper moons. The air itself seemed to vibrate with his barely contained rage as he addressed his most powerful servants. "Explain to me," Muzan said, his voice carrying the promise of unspeakable pain, "how a human child has managed to corrupt one of my most loyal followers." Upper Moon 1, Kokushibo, spoke with his characteristic measured tone. "The boy's power appears to affect both humans and demons. His presence enhances the abilities of those around him, while simultaneously awakening suppressed emotions and memories." "That's impossible," Upper Moon 2, Doma, interjected with his perpetual smile. "Demons don't have human emotions anymore. We've transcended such weaknesses." But even as Doma spoke those words, something flickered in his rainbow-colored eyes. A memory perhaps of what it had felt like to genuinely care about someone other than himself. "Have we?" Kokushibo's 6 eyes fixed on his fellow demon. "When did you last feel genuine pleasure in anything beyond the act of consumption? When did you last experience curiosity about something that didn't relate to your next meal?" The question hung in the air like a blade. None of them could answer it. Muzan's attention turned to Upper Moon 4. Hantengu, who was cowering in his usual fearful posture. "What of your reconnaissance mission? What did you learn about this silver-eyed threat?" "My personalities observed him extensively," Hantengu whispered. "Each one came back changed. Sekido's anger became focused on protecting rather than destroying. Karaku's joy became genuine rather than sadistic. Aizetsu's sorrow became empathy for others' pain. Even Urogi's aggression transformed into something resembling justice." "You're all becoming contaminated," Muzan realized with growing horror. "His influence is spreading even through indirect contact." Upper Moon 6, Daki, spoke up from where she'd been silently observing. "Brother and I attempted to eliminate the threat directly. The boy's power is unlike anything we've encountered. But more disturbing is how he made us remember things we'd forgotten, human things." Her brother Gyutaro emerged from her body, his expression troubled. "He made us remember what it felt like to protect each other when we were human, not out of hunger or necessity, but out of love." "Then we eliminate them all," Muzan declared, his fury building to dangerous levels. "We kill him, his demon sister, and everyone who has been corrupted by his influence." The meeting was interrupted by urgent news. Scouts reported that the Hashira were mobilizing for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on multiple Upper Moon territories simultaneously. "They're not just hunting us individually anymore," Kokushibo observed. "They're working together, use the boy's enhancement techniques to coordinate attacks across vast distances." Within hours, the reports began flooding in. Upper Moon 4 found himself facing not one but 3 Hashira working in perfect coordination. Muchiro Tokito's misbreathing had evolved into something that affected memory and perception on levels that went beyond mere technique. When combined with Mitsuri Kanroji's love breathing, which had developed the ability to strengthen bonds between allies, and Obanai Iguro's serpent breathing that could now track emotional connections, Hantengu's split personalities were systematically isolated and defeated. "They're not fighting our techniques," his final personality reported before dissolving. "They're fighting our natures, our fundamental essences. How is this possible?" Upper Moon 6 faced an even more devastating combination. Tengen Uzui's sound breathing had evolved to the point where he could create harmony between multiple fighters across vast distances. When Kyujiro Rengoku's flame breathing joined the battle, burning with passion that literally ignited hope in others, and Sanemi's wind breathing began carrying that hope across the battlefield, Daki and Gyutaro found themselves remembering what it felt like to fight for love rather than survival. The battle ended not with their destruction but with their surrender. Tears streaming down their faces as they chose to abandon their demonic nature rather than continue causing suffering. "We remember now," Daki whispered as Nezuko approached to help them begin their transformation back toward harmony. "We remember what it felt like to be brother and sister instead of predator and prey." Upper Moon 2's fate was perhaps the most shocking of all. Doma, who had prided himself on his complete lack of genuine emotion, found himself facing Shinobu Kocho, whose poison breathing had evolved into something that could affect spiritual toxicity as well as physical. But it wasn't the poison that defeated him. It was when Kanao Tsuyuri, using her enhanced visual abilities to see the connections between all living things, forced him to experience genuine emotion for the first time in centuries. "I can feel," Doma gasped, his perpetual smile finally fading. "I can actually feel what others are experiencing. The pain I've caused, the joy I've destroyed, the love I've corrupted. How do humans live with this intensity?" "By sharing it with others," Shinobu replied gently, offering him the same mercy he had never shown his victims. "By choosing to create more love than pain, more hope than despair." With 3 of his upper moons either defeated or transformed, Muzan made a desperate decision. If conventional demons couldn't handle this threat, he would have to create something entirely new. Working with forbidden techniques that predated even his own transformation, he began crafting the perfect counter to Ultra Instinct. The Instinct Eater would be a demon that could predict prescient movement, feed on compassion rather than flesh, and grow stronger in the presence of hope and mercy. Meanwhile, at the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, Tanjiro was experiencing his own evolution. Training with Yoraichi had pushed his abilities beyond anything he'd thought possible. Your power is reaching a critical threshold, Yoraichi warned during one of their sessions. Ultra Instinct isn't just enhancing your abilities anymore. It's beginning to transcend the boundaries between individual consciousness and universal awareness. What does that mean? Tanjiro asked, though part of him already knew the answer. It means you're becoming something that exists between human and divine. Your compassion is becoming a force of nature. You're understanding a lens through which reality itself can be reshaped. The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. If Tanjiro's power continued to grow, he might become capable of ending the demon threat entirely. But at what cost? Would he still be human when it was over? These concerns were interrupted by the arrival of urgent intelligence. Muzan had been spotted near ancient burial grounds, conducting rituals that hadn't been performed in over 1,000 years. He's creating something new, Kagaya reported during an emergency meeting. Our scouts describe energy signatures unlike anything in recorded demon history. But perhaps the most disturbing news came from an unexpected source. Akaza had finally emerged from his self-imposed exile, but instead of returning to Muzan's service, he sought out Tanjiro directly. I need to warn you, the former Upper Moon said, his eyes haunted by memories both old and new. Muzan isn't just creating a new demon. He's creating the antithesis of everything you represent. A being that becomes stronger when faced with mercy, that feeds on the very compassion that makes you powerful. Then we'll face it together, Tanjiro replied simply. All of us. Human, demon, and everything in between. Akaza stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. You still believe redemption is possible for everyone, don't you? Even for something specifically designed to corrupt everything good in the world. Especially for something like that, Tanjiro said, his silver eyes blazing with determination. Because if we can reach something created to be unreachable, then we prove that nothing is truly beyond hope. As preparations began for what everyone knew would be the final confrontation, reports continued to arrive about strange phenomena occurring across Japan. Reality itself seemed to be preparing for a battle that would determine the fundamental nature of existence. In the distance, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, carrying the scent of ozone and something else, something that made every Demon Slayer's instincts scream warnings. The Instinct Eater was coming, and with it, a test that would determine whether compassion really could triumph over a force specifically designed to corrupt it. But in a temple hidden in the mountains, a boy with silver eyes continued his meditation, surrounded by allies, both human and formerly demonic, believing with absolute conviction that love would find a way to win. Even against the impossible. The attack came at dawn, when the morning mist still clung to the mountains and the world was caught between darkness and light. Muzan didn't announce his presence or issue challenges. He simply appeared in the courtyard of the Demon Slayer headquarters with his newest creation at his side, and reality itself seemed to bend around their combined malevolence. Tanjiro felt the wrongness immediately. His Ultra Instinct, usually a source of calm certainty, began screaming warnings that made his entire body tense with alarm. Whatever was approaching carried a corruption so profound that it made his silver eyes water just to perceive it. Everyone out, he shouted, his voice carrying across the compound with supernatural clarity. Get the non-comments to safety. Something terrible is coming. But it was already too late. The Instinct Eater burst through the main gates like a living nightmare. It looked human at first glance, but the resemblance was a mockery of everything humanity represented. Its eyes were empty voids that seemed to devour light itself. Its movements were wrong, jerky and unpredictable in ways that made Tanjiro's prescient abilities falter and fail. Worse still, it was laughing, not with joy or madness, but with a sound that suggested it found the very concept of hope amusing. So, this is the boy with silver eyes, Muzan said, his voice carrying easily across the command, despite being spoken at conversational volume. The child who thinks love can overcome any obstacle, how delightfully naive. The first Hashira to engage was Sanemi, his wind breathing creating a whirlwind of cutting force that should have shredded any opponent. But the Instinct Eater moved through his attacks like they were gentle breezes, its impossible movements making a mockery of conventional combat. Worse still, every technique Sanemi used seemed to strengthen their opponent. The wind blades that missed were absorbed into the creature's form, adding to its power and speed. It's feeding on our attacks, Sanemi shouted as he barely dodged a counterstrike that left a crater where he'd been standing. Every time we use our techniques, it gets stronger. Tengen joined the battle next, his sound breathing creating explosive attacks that should have overwhelmed any opponent through sheer force. But the Instinct Eater simply absorbed the sound waves, its form growing larger and more defined with each technique it consumed. This is impossible. Tengen gasped as his most powerful attacks were not just deflected but devoured. It's like fighting our own techniques turned against us. Kyujiro's flame breathing met the same fate, his passionate fire being converted into cold malevolence. Mitsuri's love breathing, the technique that had helped redeem so many demons, was twisted into something that felt like emotional poison. That's when Tanjiro understood the horrible truth. The Instinct Eater wasn't just immune to their abilities, it was specifically designed to counter everything they had learned, everything his influence had taught them. It's feeding on coordination, he realized with growing horror. Every time we work together, every time we use the techniques we've developed, we're making it stronger. Muzan's laughter was cold and satisfied. Did you think your power was without weakness, boy? Did you believe that compassion and cooperation were always strengths? My creation here proves otherwise. The better you fight together, the more powerful it becomes. The battle that followed was a nightmare of constantly shifting tactics. Every strategy the Hashira attempted was not just countered but turned against them. When they fought as individuals, they were overwhelmed by the creature's impossible speed and strength. When they coordinated their attacks, they fed its power and made it even more dangerous. But the real horror came when Nezuko joined the fight. The Instinct Eater's attention fixed on her immediately, and its empty eyes lit up with something approaching hunger. When it spoke, its voice was like the sound of hope dying. A demon that chooses to protect rather than consume, it said, advancing on Nezuko with deliberate slowness. How wonderfully pathetic. Do you know what happens when I devour creatures like you? I don't just consume your power, I consume the very concept of choice that made you different. Nezuko's response was immediate and fierce. Her demon abilities had grown tremendously under Tanjiro's influence, and she unleashed them now with desperate fury. Her claws extended into razor-sharp weapons, her speed increased beyond anything she'd previously achieved, and her protective instincts blazed with an intensity that made the air itself seem to burn. But every attack she made was absorbed, analyzed, and reflected back at her with corrupted intent. The creature wasn't just copying her techniques, it was showing her what those same abilities would look like if they were driven by malice instead of love. No! Tanjiro's Ultra Instinct activated with a fury that made the ground crack beneath his feet. Silver light blazed around him as he moved faster than anyone present could track, positioning himself between the Instinct Eater and his sister. What followed was combat that transcended anything the world had ever seen. Tanjiro's movements were pure poetry, each dodge and strike flowing seamlessly into the next. His silver eyes tracked possibilities that hadn't yet become reality, allowing him to counter attacks that were still forming in his opponent's mind. But the Instinct Eater was learning. With every exchange, it grew more adept at predicting Tanjiro's prescient movements. Its initially chaotic fighting style was becoming organized, purposeful, designed specifically to counter Ultra Instinct itself. Fascinating, Muzan observed from the edge of the battlefield. Watch how it adapts. Every time the boy anticipates an attack, my creation learns to anticipate his anticipation. Soon, his prescience will become a liability rather than an advantage. The Demon King's words proved prophetic. As the battle progressed, Tanjiro found his Ultra Instinct becoming increasingly unreliable. The future he was seeing was being altered in real time by an opponent that learned from his predictions. That's when Zenitsu made his move. The Blonde Slayer had been watching from the sidelines, his enhanced hearing picking up something others missed. The Instinct Eater's laughter wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern that reminded him of thunder. Tanjiro, he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. It's not just learning from you, it's trying to synchronize with your heartbeat. If I can disrupt that rhythm... Zenitsu's thunder breathing had evolved far beyond its original limitations. Under Tanjiro's influence, he developed techniques that could affect not just physical opponents but spiritual ones as well. His 16th form, Lightning Empathy, was designed to disrupt hostile synchronization. The effect was immediate. The Instinct Eater stumbled, its perfect adaptation faltering as Zenitsu's thunder broke its connection to Tanjiro's biological rhythms. Now, Tanjiro shouted, his Ultra Instinct stabilizing. Everyone together, but not as individual techniques, as one unified response. What happened next defied every rule of combat they'd ever learned. Instead of using their separate breathing forms, all the assembled fighters began moving to the same rhythm. Inosuke's beast breathing became the wild foundation that the others built upon. Sanomi's wind carried everyone's intent across the battlefield. Tengen's sound breathing provided the harmony that unified their individual strengths. But it was when Yoriichi arrived that everything changed. The legendary swordsman appeared without fanfare, his presence immediately shifting the dynamics of the entire battlefield. But instead of joining the fight directly, he did something that caught everyone off guard. He began to dance. It was the Hinokami Kagura, the dance of the fire god, performed with a perfection that made reality itself seem to hold its breath. But this wasn't combat. This was art elevated to a spiritual level, movement that existed beyond technique or strategy. And as Yoriichi danced, something remarkable began happening to everyone present. The corrupted influence of the Instinct Eater began to weaken. The creature's ability to feed on their techniques faltered as Yoriichi's dance reminded them that true power came not from fighting, but from understanding the deeper rhythms that connected all things. The dance doesn't fight the darkness, Yoriichi called out, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around them. It simply exists in harmony with the light. Be the dance, Tanjiro. Don't fight your instincts. Become them. Understanding flooded through Tanjiro like liquid fire. He'd been thinking of Ultra Instinct as a technique, as something to be controlled and directed, but that was wrong. Ultra Instinct wasn't something he used, it was something he was. The transformation that followed defied description. Tanjiro's silver aura exploded outward, but instead of the blazing intensity of combat, it carried the serene power of absolute certainty. His movements became the dance Yoriichi was performing, but elevated to a level that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. But more importantly, his transformation began affecting everyone around him in ways they'd never experienced before. Sanemi found his wind breathing flowing like a gentle breeze that could turn into a hurricane at need. Tengen's sound breathing became music that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. Kyojiro's flame breathing burned with warmth rather than heat, consuming darkness while leaving light untouched. Zenitsu's thunder breathing synchronized perfectly with everyone else's heartbeats, creating a network of shared awareness. Inosuke's beast breathing became the wild creativity that allowed impossible combinations. Even the reformed demons who had joined the battle found their abilities enhanced beyond anything they'd experienced. Nezuko was transformed, most of all, her demon abilities becoming something that protected not just through strength but through the power of absolute compassion made manifest. Most remarkably, Akaza stepped forward to join the unified assault. His martial arts, once used only for destruction, became part of the greater dance of protection and healing. This is what strength really means, he said, his eyes bright with tears of understanding. Not dominating others, but lifting them up. Not fighting alone, but becoming part of something greater. The redeemed upper moons added their own power to the collective effort. Doma's ice techniques became crystalline barriers that protected rather than trapped. Hantengra's split personalities worked in harmony for the first time in centuries, each emotion contributing to a greater whole. Daki and Gyutaro fought as true siblings again, their combined abilities creating patterns of beauty and protection. But the most remarkable change was in their coordination. Instead of fighting as separate individuals who worked together, they became aspects of a single entity that existed to protect and heal rather than to destroy. The Instinct Eater, designed to feed on their cooperation, found itself starving. There was nothing to consume because they were no longer using techniques. They had become technique itself, movement and purpose unified into something that transcended the distinction between action and intent. Impossible, Muzan whispered, his confidence finally showing cracks. No power should be able to counter my creation so completely. But even as his ultimate weapon began to dissolve, Muzan himself was changing. The sight of perfect cooperation of enemies becoming allies, of hatred transformed into love, was awakening something in him that he'd thought dead for a millennium. He was remembering what it felt like to be human. And in that moment of vulnerability, Tanjiro struck. Not with violence, not with hatred, but with the most devastating attack of all. He offered Muzan his hand. Muzan's response to Tanjiro's offer was a sound that might have been laughter or sobbing. Perhaps both. His multiple forms continued to shift and change, as if his very body couldn't decide what it wanted to be anymore. You think, he gasped between transformations, that 1,000 years of evolution can be undone by sympathy? That immortality can be cast aside like an unwanted coat? But even as he spoke, something was changing in his voice. The absolute certainty that had characterized his every word for centuries was beginning to crack. I have felt nothing but hunger for so long, he continued, his form solidifying into something almost human. Do you know what it's like to live without joy, without satisfaction, without any emotion except the need to consume and survive? I can't even remember what happiness feels like. Tanjiro took a step closer, his silver eyes filled with infinite patience. Then let me help you remember. What happened next defied every law of combat, every principle of demon slaying, every rule that had governed the 1,000-year war between their species. Tanjiro extended his hand to the Demon King, not to strike, not to threaten, but to offer comfort to a being that had caused more suffering than any other creature in history. The gesture sent shockwaves through everyone present. The surviving Hashira tensed, ready to strike if this showed even the slightest sign of being a trap. Nezuko watched with fascination and growing hope. Even Yoriichi, who had seen wonders beyond imagination, stared in amazement at the boy's courage. But Muzan simply stared at the offered hand like it was an alien artifact from another world. Why? He whispered, his voice breaking. After everything I've done, everyone I've killed, every life I've destroyed, why would you offer me mercy? Because mercy isn't something you earn, Tanjiro replied gently. It's something you receive, and because I think deep down you've been waiting for someone to offer it to you for a very long time. For a moment that stretched into eternity, it seemed like Muzan might actually reach out and take that offered hand. His own arm began to rise, trembling with the weight of a decision that would reshape the world. But then the moment shattered. Upper Moon 1, Kokushibo arrived like a living sword strike. He'd been watching the battle from the shadows, and the sight of his master wavering in the face of human compassion triggered every protective instinct he possessed. "My lord," he cried, his 6 eyes blazing with desperate loyalty, "you cannot let this child's weak philosophy poison your perfect strength." His attack was aimed not at Tanjiro but at Muzan himself, intended to shock the Demon King back to his senses through violence. It was a desperate gambit from a servant who would rather see his master angry than vulnerable. But Tanjiro's ultra instinct responded faster than thought. He moved between Kokushibo and Muzan, intercepting an attack that could have split mountains. His sword met the Upper Moon's blade in a collision that sent shockwaves racing across the landscape, but he held firm. "Stop," Tanjiro commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This isn't about strength anymore. This is about choice." Kokushibo's response was a flurry of attacks that would have overwhelmed any other opponent. His moon-breathing techniques created crescents of cutting force that filled the air with deadly silver light, but Tanjiro moved through them all like they were gentle rain. His ultra instinct elevated to levels that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. Behind them, Muzan watched his most loyal servant battle the boy who had offered him redemption, and something fundamental shifted in his understanding of the world. For the first time in centuries, he was seeing strength used to protect rather than to dominate. He was witnessing power guided by compassion rather than hunger. And slowly, painfully, he began to remember what it had felt like to be human. "Enough," he said quietly. Kokushibo didn't hear him at first, too focused on his desperate assault against Tanjiro's impossible defenses. His moon-breathing had evolved beyond anything he'd previously achieved, driven by loyalty and fear in equal measure. "Enough!" Muzan's voice carried across the battlefield with the force of absolute command. This time, Kokushibo froze mid-attack, his blade stopping inches from Tanjiro's throat. The Upper Moon's 6 eyes were wide with confusion and growing horror as he realized what his master was about to do. "My lord, please," Kokushibo begged, his voice breaking with centuries of accumulated devotion. "Don't let his words weaken you. You are perfection itself. You are evolution incarnate. You cannot abandon everything we've built together." Muzan looked at his most faithful servant with something approaching pity. "What have we built, Kokushibo? A hierarchy of monsters? An empire of fear? 1,000 years of meaningless consumption? We have built strength," Kokushibo protested. "We have transcended human weakness. We have become gods among insects." "Have we?" Muzan's form was becoming more human with each word, the monstrous additions of his final transformation slowly dissolving. "Look at us. Look at what we've become. We call ourselves superior to humans, but we spend every moment of our existence hiding from the sun, feeding on those we claim to be beneath us. What kind of gods must skulk in shadows and feast on their supposed inferiors?" Tanjiro lowered his sword, sensing that the real battle was now taking place in the realm of ideas, rather than physical combat. "Strength isn't about being better than others," he said gently. "It's about using your power to help others become better than they thought they could be." Kokushibo's laugh was bitter and desperate. Philosophy from a child who has lived barely 2 decades. "My lord, surely you cannot be swayed by such naive idealism." "Naive?" Muzan repeated, and for the first time in centuries there was genuine thought in his voice rather than reflexive dominance. "Or honest? When did honesty become naivety? When did compassion become weakness?" The transformation happening in Muzan was visible now, not just in his physical form, but in his very presence. The oppressive aura of malevolence that had characterized him for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by something that might have been hope. But Kokushibo couldn't accept what he was seeing. His entire existence had been built around serving the Demon King, around believing that their path was the only possible evolution for their kind. To see that foundation crumbling was more than he could bear. "If you will not remain strong," he said, his voice filled with tragic resolve, "then I will carry your strength for you." The attack he launched wasn't aimed at Tanjiro this time. It was directed at Muzan himself, intended to force the Demon King back into his monstrous form through the familiar rhythm of violence and dominance. But something extraordinary happened. Nezuko moved to intercept the attack, her demon speed allowing her to position herself between Kokushibo and Muzan. But instead of fighting back, she did something that shocked everyone present. She hugged him. Not a combat grapple or a restraining hold, but an actual embrace. Her arms wrapped around the ancient demon with the same protective instinct she'd shown her human family, treating him not as an enemy, but as someone who needed comfort. "I understand," she whispered in his ear as his moon-breathing techniques died away in confusion. "I understand what it's like to be afraid that changing means losing everything you are. But change doesn't have to mean death, it can mean rebirth." Kokushibo stood frozen in her embrace, his 6 eyes wide with an emotion he hadn't felt since his human days. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness rather than fear? When had anyone last looked at him and seen something worth saving rather than something that needed to be destroyed? You were human once, Nezuko continued, her voice filled with infinite gentleness. You had a name, a family, dreams that didn't involve consuming others. Those things aren't gone forever. They're just sleeping, waiting for someone to remind you they exist. Slowly, carefully, Kokushibo's arms came up to return her embrace. His deadly claws retracted, his threatening aura faded, and for a moment he was simply a lost soul accepting comfort from someone who understood what it meant to be caught between humanity and monstrosity. Michikatsu, he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. My name was Michikatsu Tsukujikuni. The admission broke something inside him that had been holding back centuries of suppressed emotion. He began to weep, not with the dramatic anguish of a defeated villain, but with the quiet relief of someone finally allowed to set down a burden they'd carried too long. Muzan watched this exchange with growing wonder. His most loyal servant, the Upper Moon, who had never shown a moment's weakness in 4 centuries, was crying in the arms of a demon who had chosen to remain human. This is what I've been fighting against, he realized aloud. Not weakness, connection, the very thing that made life worth living in the first place. Tanjiro approached him again, more slowly this time, but with no less compassion in his silver eyes. It's not too late, he said simply. It's never too late to choose who you want to be. This time, when Tanjiro extended his hand, Muzan reached out and took it. The moment their fingers touched, something unprecedented happened. The curse that had bound every demon to Muzan's will simply dissolved. Across Japan, demons who had been compelled to consume human flesh suddenly found themselves free to choose their own path. Some chose violence, some chose hiding, but others, inspired by the example of Nezuko and now Kokushibo, chose to seek redemption. What happens now? Muzan asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that would have been unthinkable moments before. Now we figure out how to live together, Tanjiro replied. Humans and demons finding a way to coexist without destroying each other. And if some demons choose to remain monsters, if some humans refuse to accept our redemption? Tanjiro's smile was sad but determined. Then we protect the innocent from those who would harm them, regardless of what species they belong to. The fight doesn't end, it just becomes more complicated. As the sun rose over the battlefield, illuminating a world forever changed by the events of this single morning, Muzan felt something he hadn't experienced since his human days. He felt curious about what tomorrow might bring. But even as hope bloomed in the hearts of those present, Tanjiro's ultra instinct was warning him that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. Changing hearts was only the beginning. Now came the much harder task of changing a world that had been shaped by 1,000 years of warfare and hatred. The last stand had ended not in victory or defeat, but in the much more difficult prospect of starting over completely. And in the distance, carried on the morning wind, came the sound of other battles beginning as the news of Muzan's transformation spread throughout both human and demon communities. The war might be ending, but the peace would be far more challenging than any conflict they'd ever faced. 6 months after what historians would call the Dawn Transformation, the world had become a place that neither humans nor demons fully recognized. The immediate aftermath of Muzan's redemption had been chaos in its purest form. When the demonic curse dissolved, over 10,000 demons across Japan suddenly found themselves free to make their own choices for the first time in centuries. The results were as varied as the individuals themselves. Some demons, so consumed by their monstrous nature that they had forgotten their humanity entirely, continued their predatory ways. These became the targets of a new kind of demon slayer, one that hunted not out of hatred but out of necessity. The core had evolved from an army of vengeance into something more akin to a supernatural police force. Others, inspired by Nezuko's example and Muzan's transformation, sought redemption through service. They used their enhanced abilities to protect humans from natural disasters, to provide aid in remote areas where normal help couldn't reach, to serve as bridges between the two species. But perhaps the most interesting group were those demons who simply wanted to live quietly. They found remote places where they could exist without threatening anyone, surviving on animal blood or, in some cases, learning to sustain themselves through meditation and spiritual practices that Tanjiro had helped develop. The headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps had been rebuilt, but its purpose had fundamentally changed. Where once it had been a fortress dedicated to extermination, it now served as a center for mediation, education, and the development of new techniques for peaceful coexistence. Tanjiro found himself in the strange position of being not just a demon slayer but a diplomat, teacher, and philosopher all at once. His ultra instinct had continued to evolve, becoming less about combat and more about understanding the complex emotional and spiritual currents that flowed between different individuals and groups. "Tell me again why we're trusting a demon to guard the village," said Jiro, a farmer whose family had been killed by demons 5 years earlier. His voice carried the weight of old pain and fresh skepticism. Across from him sat Akuma, a former lower moon who had chosen redemption after witnessing Muzan's transformation. The demon's appearance had become more human over the months, his predatory features softened by a diet of meditation and animal blood. Because, Tanjiro replied patiently, Akuma has spent the last 6 months proving that his choices are genuine. He saved 17 people from bandits, helped rebuild the bridge that was destroyed in the spring floods, and hasn't harmed a single human being. But he's still a demon, Jiro protested. What happens when he gets hungry, when his true nature reasserts itself? Akuma spoke for himself, his voice carrying quiet dignity. My true nature is what I choose it to be. I was human once, like you. I had a family, hopes, fears. I lost myself for 2 centuries, but with help, I've found my way back to who I want to be. And if you lose control again, then Tanjiro or one of the other Slayers will do what they have to do, Akuma replied simply. I've accepted that responsibility as part of my redemption, but I won't lose control. Not when I finally remember what it feels like to be proud of my actions instead of ashamed of them. These conversations were happening across Japan as communities struggled to adapt to a reality where the supernatural beings they'd feared for generations might now be their protectors. The process was slow, often painful, and sometimes it failed entirely. In the mountains near Kyoto, a group of demons who had rejected redemptions established a territory where they continued to hunt humans. It fell to the reformed Hashira to deal with them, but even these conflicts were different now. Where once the goal had been simple extermination, now it involved attempting communication first, offering alternatives, and only resorting to violence when all other options were exhausted. Senemi had become particularly skilled at these interventions. His experience with his own anger and his growing understanding of redemption made him uniquely suited to reach demons who were struggling with their monstrous impulses. I get it, he told a former Upper Moon who had been terrorizing a mountain village. I know what it's like to be so angry that violence feels like the only option, but anger doesn't have to control you. You can choose what to do with it. The demon, surprised by empathy from someone he'd expected to simply attack him, hesitated just long enough for Senemi to continue. Help us protect people instead of hunting them. Use that strength for something that'll make you proud when you look back on it. It didn't always work. Some demons were too far gone, too consumed by their monstrous nature to find their way back to their humanity. But enough chose redemption that the character of the conflict began to change. Meanwhile, the human side of the equation was proving equally challenging. Not everyone was willing to accept that demons could change. The Demon Slayer Corps found itself dealing with human extremist groups who viewed any cooperation with former demons as betrayal of those who had died in the centuries of warfare. You're consorting with monsters, screamed Takeshi, a former Slayer who had lost his entire unit to demons years earlier. Every demon you spare is a potential killer. Every act of mercy is a betrayal of our fallen comrades. These confrontations were often more difficult than dealing with unredeemed demons, because they came from people whose pain was completely understandable. Tanjiro found himself drawing on reserves of patience he hadn't known he possessed. I understand your anger, he would tell them. I've lost family to demons too, but if we let our pain decide our actions, we become the very thing we're fighting against. We become monsters ourselves, just of a different kind. The most challenging aspect of the New World Order was establishing functional institutions. How do you create laws that apply to beings with supernatural abilities? How do you establish justice systems that can handle conflicts between species with fundamentally different natures? Kagawa Ubeyashiki, despite his illness, had thrown himself into these challenges with remarkable enthusiasm. Warring with reformed demons like Muzan and Kokushibo, he was developing legal frameworks that had never been necessary before. We need courts that can handle supernatural disputes, he explained during one planning session. Mediators who understand both human psychology and demonic nature. Enforcement mechanisms that can deal with beings who can regenerate from mortal wounds. The solutions they developed were unprecedented in human history. Judicial panels that included both humans and reformed demons. Enforcement teams that combined traditional demon-slaying techniques with new methods designed to subdue rather than destroy. Rehabilitation programs that help demons reconnect with their human memories and emotions. But perhaps the most remarkable development was happening in the realm of technique and training. Tanjiro's influence had fundamentally changed how both humans and demons approached the development of their abilities. The rigid breathing forms of the past were being replaced by more fluid, intuitive approaches that emphasized understanding and adaptation over mere power. New practitioners were learning to fight not just with their bodies but with their emotions, their empathy, their ability to understand and connect with their opponents. Combat was becoming less about defeating enemies and more about reaching understanding. Watch how she moves, Tanjiro told a group of students as they observed Nezuko demonstrating a new technique. She's not just using her demon strength, she's combining it with human compassion, creating something that's more than the sum of its parts. Nezuko had become perhaps the most important figure in the New World Order, serving as living proof that transformation didn't have to mean losing your essential self. Her ability to remain fundamentally human while embracing her demonic abilities made her a bridge between the two species in ways that no one else could match. Zenitsu had undergone his own remarkable transformation. No longer paralyzed by fear, he had become one of the most effective teachers in the new Corps. His thunder breathing had evolved to include techniques for calming hostile emotions and creating harmony between conflicting groups. Fear used to control me, he told his students. Now I use it as information. When I'm afraid, I ask myself what I'm trying to protect, and that gives me the courage to act. Inosuke had found his calling as a wilderness guide, helping reformed demons find safe places to live while they worked through their transformation. His beast breathing had developed into something that could communicate with both wild animals and feral demons, creating bridges of understanding that saved countless lives. Strength isn't about being the toughest, he would tell the demons he helped. It's about knowing when to fight and when to find another way. But even as progress was being made, new challenges were emerging. Reports were coming in from remote areas of Japan about strange phenomena. Demons and humans who had achieved perfect integration were developing abilities that transcended both species' normal limitations. Some could survive in sunlight while maintaining demonic strength. Others had developed healing abilities that could cure conditions that had been considered permanently debilitating. It's evolution, Muzan observed during one of their planning sessions. Not the kind I once sought through domination and consumption, but genuine evolution through cooperation and understanding. The implications were staggering. If humans and demons could truly integrate their abilities while maintaining their essential humanity, what would that mean for the future of both species? But even as hope bloomed for what they might become together, new challenges emerged that tested their resolve in unexpected ways. The first sign of cosmic attention came 3 months after Muzan's transformation. Strange aurora-like lights began appearing in the night sky over Japan, visible even in broad daylight. These weren't natural phenomena. They pulsed with intelligence, seemed to respond to the areas where human-demon integration was most successful. "They're watching us," Nezuko observed during one of their evening patrols. Her enhanced senses could detect something vast and alien focusing its attention on their world. Something from beyond our reality is taking notice of what we've accomplished. Tanjiro's ultra instinct confirmed her suspicions. His expanded awareness could sense observation from entities that existed in dimensions parallel to their own. The successful integration of human and demon consciousness had apparently created a spiritual resonance that attracted attention from cosmic forces. The first direct contact came when Yoraichi, now working closely with the reformed demon slayers, began experiencing visions during his meditation sessions. "I see beings of pure energy," he reported to the council. "They exist between worlds, feeding on the spiritual energy generated by successful cooperation between opposing forces. Our achievement has made Earth visible to them for the first time." The implications were staggering. Their success in ending the human-demon war had essentially announced their world's existence to entities that viewed successful integration as either a resource to be harvested or a threat to be eliminated. But it was Muzan, with his millennium of experience and newly awakened empathy, who provided the most crucial insight. "I've encountered references to these beings in the most ancient demonic texts," he revealed during an emergency meeting. "They're called the Harvesters. They seek out worlds where consciousness has evolved beyond its natural limitations and either incorporate those worlds into their collective or destroy them to prevent contamination of their perfect order." The cosmic threat required a response that went beyond anything they'd previously imagined. Traditional demon-slaying techniques, even enhanced by Ultra Instinct, would be useless against beings that existed primarily in spiritual rather than physical dimensions. Working together, humans and demons began developing entirely new forms of combat that combined physical technique with spiritual transcendence. Tanjiro's Ultra Instinct evolved to encompass not just perfect movement, but perfect understanding of the connections between all forms of consciousness. The transformation was spreading beyond Earth now, and they were no longer just protecting their own world. They had become gardeners of consciousness itself, helping it bloom in new and beautiful ways across all possible realities. A year had passed since the Dawn transformation, and Tanjiro often found himself sitting in quiet contemplation, trying to understand the full implications of what had occurred. The world had changed in ways that went far beyond the simple ending of a war between species. On this particular evening, he sat with Nezuko on the porch of their rebuilt family home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The peace between them was comfortable, born of shared experiences that few others could understand. "Do you ever regret it?" Nezuko asked quietly, her amber eyes reflecting the dying light. "Everything that's happened, all the changes, the responsibility you carry now?" Tanjiro considered the question seriously. His life had become something he never could have imagined as a simple charcoal seller. He was now a mediator between species, a teacher of techniques that bridged the gap between human and demon abilities, and a symbol of hope for a future that seemed impossible just months ago. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never awakened Ultra Instinct, he admitted, if we'd followed the original path, if the war had continued as it always had. And I realize that wondering about other possibilities is just another form of running away from the present. We can't change what was, we can only choose what will be. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gyu, who approached with his characteristic quiet dignity. The former water Hashira had adapted to the new world perhaps better than any of the other pillars, his natural stoicism serving him well in the complex negotiations that now define much of their work. The council meeting went well, he reported, settling beside them on the porch. 3 more demon communities have agreed to the integration protocols. Muzan's testimony about the benefits of choosing human values over demonic instincts continues to carry significant weight. It was still surreal to hear Muzan discussed as an ally rather than an enemy. The former Demon King had become one of their most effective advocates, his personal transformation serving as proof that even the most seemingly irredeemable beings could choose a different path. What about the human communities? Tanjiro asked.
More resistance there, unfortunately, Gyu replied with a slight frown. The farming village near Aseka is still refusing to allow any demons in their territory, even reformed ones. They've had 3 generations of losses to demonic attacks. The fear runs deep.
Fear is harder to heal than hatred, Nezuko observed with wisdom that belied her apparent youth. Hatred burns bright and consumes itself. Fear burrows deep and whispers that change is just another form of danger. Their philosophical discussion was joined by an unexpected participant as Kokushibo, now going by his human name Michikatsu, approached from the garden path. His transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all the redeemed demons, where once he had been consumed by an obsession with strength and superiority, he now carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had found peace with his limitations. I've been thinking about the nature of strength, he said, settling gracefully beside the group. For 4 centuries, I believed that power was about surpassing others, about achieving a perfection that placed me above human concerns. And now, Tanjiro prompted gently. Now I understand that true strength lies in connection. The ultra instinct you've developed isn't powerful because it makes you faster or stronger than others. It's powerful because it allows you to understand and respond to the world around you with perfect empathy. The conversation that followed touched on questions that had occupied philosophers for millennia, but with a practical urgency born of their unique circumstances. What does it mean to be human? Nezuko wondered aloud. I have demonic abilities, enhanced strength, regeneration, resistance to sunlight that shouldn't be possible, but I feel more human now than I ever did before my transformation. Maybe, Tanjiro suggested, being human isn't about the body you inhabit or the abilities you possess. Maybe it's about the choices you make, the values you embrace, the connections you form with others. Then what about demons who choose to remain predators? Gyu asked. Are they less than human because of their choices, or are they expressing a different but equally valid aspect of existence? It was Michikatsu who answered, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of contemplation. Choice implies responsibility. If a being has the capacity to choose between causing harm and providing help, then the choice to harm others is a rejection of the fundamental interconnectedness that gives life meaning. But that raises another question, Nezuko interjected. What about beings who lack the capacity for such choices? Are they evil, or are they simply following their nature? I think, Tanjiro said slowly, that's where our responsibility comes in. If we have the power to help others expand their capacity for choice, then using that power becomes our highest calling. Zenitsu and Inosuke joined them as the stars began to appear, both having grown tremendously from their experiences. Zenitsu's formerly crippling anxiety had transformed into a heightened sensitivity to others' emotional states, making him an exceptional mediator. Inosuke's wild nature had evolved into a deep understanding of instinctive behavior that helped bridge the gap between human logic and animal wisdom. I used to think courage meant not being afraid, Zenitsu said, settling beside his friends. But I've learned that real courage is acting in spite of fear, choosing to help others even when you're terrified. And I thought strength meant being better than everyone else, Inosuke added, his usual boisterous energy tempered by new wisdom. But the strongest thing you can do is help others discover their own strength. As the stars wheeled overhead, their conversation turned to the cosmic challenges they'd recently faced and overcome. Do you think we'll succeed in the long term? Nezuko asked. Do you think this new world we're building will survive and thrive? Tanjiro looked up at the stars, many of which now twinkled with the gentle light of worlds that had achieved their own forms of consciousness integration. I think success isn't a destination you reach, it's a choice you make every day. Every time we choose understanding over judgment, cooperation over domination, hope over fear, we succeed a little bit more. And when we fail? Michikatsu asked quietly. Then we learn from our failures and choose again, Tanjiro replied simply. The power of ultra instinct isn't that it makes me perfect, it's that it helps me respond to each moment with authenticity and compassion, regardless of what happened in the moments before. The philosophical core of their journey had become clear through their discussions. Demon Slayer's original themes of family, sacrifice, and the nature of humanity had been elevated to cosmic significance. They had proven that evolution didn't require abandoning compassion, that strength could coexist with gentleness, that transcendence didn't mean losing touch with fundamental human values. What we've learned, Tanjiro concluded, is that the most powerful force in existence isn't hatred or fear or even love alone. It's the choice to see possibility where others see only limitation, to offer connection where others see only separation, to believe in redemption even when it seems impossible. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching shooting stars that were actually messages of hope from distant worlds, each of them understood that they were living through a transformation that went far beyond the ending of a supernatural war. They were participating in the evolution of consciousness itself, proving that even the most fundamental aspects of existence could be changed through the application of sincere compassion and unwavering determination. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in cosmic history, it was a future being shaped by beings who had chosen cooperation over conquest, understanding over domination, growth over stagnation. They were all connected, and in that connection lay the seeds of possibilities that none of them could achieve alone, but all of them could nurture together. As the cosmic integration stabilized and Earth took its place as the first world to successfully bridge multiple forms of consciousness, deeper mysteries of Tanjiro's journey began to reveal themselves. In the archives of the Yuba Ashiki family, scholars working with Muzan's recovered memories and input from the reformed harvesters had discovered the true scope of what they'd accomplished. The ancient texts weren't just history. They were instruction manuals left by previous civilizations that had faced similar choice points. "Look at this passage," Kagaya said during a gathering that now included representatives from 17 different dimensional planes. "It speaks of the eternal cycle, where consciousness learns to transcend its limitations through the courage to see unity in apparent opposition." Tanjiro studied the symbols, which seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, adapting themselves to be understood by whoever read them. It's talking about evolution on a cosmic scale, he realized. Not just our world, but consciousness itself learning and growing across all realities. But the most profound discovery came from an unexpected source. The child who had been born to two reformed demons, a being that shouldn't have been possible according to any known laws, was developing abilities that suggested the integration was entering an entirely new phase. Little Akemi, as they'd named her, could perceive connections not just between individuals but between entire timelines. During her play, she would sometimes comment on the other stories where things had gone differently. In one story, Uncle Tanjiro never got his silver eyes, she told Nezuko during a peaceful afternoon. Everyone was very sad for a very long time, but in another story, he got them too early and forgot how to be kind. I like our story best because everyone learned to choose together. These revelations coincided with the discovery of similar integration events occurring throughout cosmic history. The Harvesters shared memories of other worlds that had achieved transcendence, each in their own unique way, each adding to the growing network of connected consciousness that spanned multiple galaxies. Earth's achievement wasn't unique, but it was special. Never before had a world managed to integrate opposing forces so completely while maintaining the individual identity and free will of every participant. Nezuko's evolution continued to astound everyone. Her resistance to sunlight had developed into something far more significant. She had become a living bridge between different states of existence, able to help others navigate the complex transformation from one form of consciousness to another. "I understand now why I had to become a demon first," she confided to Tanjiro during one of their walks through the peaceful villages that now dotted their homeland. "I had to experience separation before I could understand unity. I had to lose my humanity before I could help others choose to keep theirs." Perhaps the strangest ongoing mystery was what was happening to Tanjiro himself. His ultra instinct had evolved far beyond enhanced reflexes or even prescient movement. He was becoming something that existed partially outside normal time and space, able to perceive the connections between all possible versions of reality. During meditation, he would sometimes visit other timelines, offering guidance to versions of himself that faced different challenges. The silver glow in his eyes had become something more complex, shifting through colors that didn't have names, reflecting the infinite possibilities that his consciousness could now perceive. But he remained fundamentally himself, the boy who would risk everything to protect his sister, who saw worth in every being he encountered, who believed that understanding was always preferable to violence. The final mystery revealed itself during a ceremony marking the first anniversary of cosmic integration. As representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to celebrate their achievement, Tanjiro experienced a vision that showed him the ultimate purpose behind everything they'd accomplished. He saw a cosmic tree of consciousness, its branches extending through all possible realities. Each successful integration like theirs added a new branch, a new pathway for growth and understanding. The goal wasn't conquest or uniformity, but the creation of infinite possibilities for connection and growth. We're not the endpoint, he realized, sharing his vision with the assembled multitude. We're gardeners, helping consciousness itself bloom in new and beautiful ways across all possible worlds. As the celebration continued around him, Tanjiro felt a familiar presence. Looking up at the stars, now alive with the gentle glow of countless connected civilizations, he could have sworn he heard his father's voice carrying on the cosmic wind. The dance continues, my son, and now the whole universe learns the steps. In a quiet village that had once known only fear, a young girl with impossible heritage played in sunlight that no longer threatened any being with a compassionate heart. Around her, former humans and demons worked together to tend gardens that grew in soil nourished by the tears of enemies who had become family. The story that had begun with a boy selling charcoal to feed his family had become a legend spanning galaxies, proof that love really could transform any darkness, no matter how ancient or vast. But legends, like consciousness itself, never truly end. They just become the foundation for new stories, new possibilities, new chances for beings throughout the cosmos to choose connection over isolation, growth over stagnation, hope over despair. The hidden threads weren't pulling toward a conclusion. They were weaving the beginning of something unprecedented in cosmic history, a universe where every being, no matter how different, had a place in the great dance of existence. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of connected consciousness, a silver-eyed guardian continued his eternal watch, ready to help any soul that needed reminding of what it meant to choose love over fear.